Tonight on Capital Journal, the state's unemployment rate is out today. We'll go over the job numbers going into the holiday season. ABC Administrator Matt Gipson is in studio to discuss how alcohol sales contribute to the state in tax revenue and what changes might be coming to alcohol laws and regulations. Farrell Turner of the Alabama Rural Health Association talks about the challenges facing rural hospitals and what fixes could help their situation. And Robert Doar and Ian Rowe of the American Enterprise Institute join us via Zoom to talk about their recent efforts to encourage progress in Birmingham. It's all next on Capital Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capital Journal. Alabama's latest unemployment numbers are out today. The unemployment rate for October was 2.7%. That's up just a tenth of a point from September's record low of 2.6%, but still historically low. October's rate represents 61,760 unemployed people, which is down almost 9,000 from this time last year. Governor Kay Ivey noted the continued wage growth. Average weekly wages are now at $1,017.98. That's a record high. A death row inmate's execution was called off Thursday after state officials had trouble finding a suitable vein for injecting lethal chemicals. Kenneth Eugene Smith was sentenced to death for the killing of Elizabeth Sennett in a murder-for-hire scheme involving her preacher husband. Department of Corrections Commissioner John Hamm said prison staff worked for an hour to connect the intravenous veins, but were unsuccessful after trying several locations on Smith's body. This is the second execution since September that the state has canceled because of difficulties establishing an IV. For decades, Alabama legislative leaders have wished for a new state house. The building was never meant to be a permanent home for the legislature. During the 1985 renovation of the Capitol, the old Highway Department building was retrofitted with legislative chambers and offices. But after the Capitol renovation was complete, the legislature remained in the State House, preferring their offices close to the chambers and not wanting to tarnish the pristine Capitol. Almost 40 years later, the building has fallen into disrepair, and maintenance costs are piling up. But now, a top panel of lawmakers has taken the first step toward moving to a new, proper home. Alabama Daily News first reported that the Legislative Council has directed staff to begin discussions with the retirement systems of Alabama about a new state house. Secretary of the Senate Pat Harris is leading those discussions.
It's a sad, sad, old building. Number one, we don't have room to serve the public. I mean, it's difficult for the public to get in and out of the building. It's difficult for school kids. We had about 42,000 people with tours, whether they were schools or the Civil Hair Legislature or Youth Legislature or leadership groups from different counties and cities. It's a difficult time for them to get in the building to observe government at work, which is why they're coming here. The streets are blocked with the buses that come through. The building is not functional. They can't get in to watch the committees operate. They end up standing in the hallways, which then becomes not only difficult for them to watch how government works, but it also is a fire hazard. So, it's the availability and the functionability of the building that really matters. I mean, this is the people's building. It's a government people's building. Of all buildings, it's the legislature. So the public should be able to have access to see how government works. And when you restrict that access, it's not fair to them.
The incoming and outgoing secretaries of state have diverging views over Alabama's participation in a 32-state voter registration partnership. Wes Allen, who was elected earlier this month, sent a letter announcing that the state will end its participation in the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. It's a nonprofit system used to maintain accurate voter rolls and combat fraud by allowing states to know when someone moves, dies, or registers elsewhere. Allen made a campaign promise to withdraw from the group, citing privacy concerns with personal voter information. But current Secretary of State John Merrill disagrees. He released a statement taking issue with Allen's decision, saying Alabama's participation in the group has helped prevent voter fraud and that concerns are a product of misinformation. Allen will take office in January. Randy Scott continues his reporting on the work being done to restore historic Browns Chapel AME Church in Selma. As those on the work site put it, it's a project that is going to take some time.
The buzz you hear around downtown Selma is coming from work taking place to help restore historic Brown Chapel AME Church. One person excited to hear the noise and see the work is church pastor Leotis Strong.
Hopefully within another 12 to 18 months, the rededication of this to its 1965 glorious appearance.
Strong says the church congregation has moved its services to another location, but once this project is done, this church will have new life both inside and outside.
And the inside, oh Lord God Almighty, what's planned for that inside restoration even supersedes what you're seeing on the outside.
Part one of renovations include restoring the church cupolas and bell towers.
It was much more damage as we worked on the building, much more termite damage than we realized. So that's why the project is taking quite a while. That's why we're still trying to secure more grant funds.
We are looking at probably December to finish up what we're doing here, finish the roof and finish the exterior portion that's currently funded. We're looking at getting more funding now to start doing the interior restoration on the walls, and then hopefully the stained glass windows.
History is history. Okay, anytime you can be a part of it of history and something to this extent, you know, it's always good. I can say nothing but good about it. Glad to be a part of it.
Construction supervisor Freddie Stewart says this work will make sure people can appreciate this landmark for another 100 years.
It's a lot more goes into this than people would think when you see the tower there. There's so many parts in this tower that you would just unreal it is, and to make those parts and get them all to fit together and it can look as what you see today. And it's a lot goes into it.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Last week, Capital Journal's Karen Goldsmith brought us reactions and perspectives on the election from students at Alabama State University. This week, we'll hear from students at Faulkner University, a private Christian school.
Outside of the gymnasium on the campus of Faulkner University, home of the Eagles, several students answered our questions on the current political environment. Question 1. As a college student, what issues are important to you?
Primary importance to me is economy, being able to afford things. Student loans is also another issue.
I think number one, it would have to be economy right now. We have runaway inflation in our country right now. We have people who can't afford to feed out their families or buy gasoline.
My issue as a college student is going to be the same as my issue as a Christian. A big thing for me is the abortion industry and the pro-choice, pro-life movement. My personal beliefs based off of scripture and based off of research I've done is that life begins at conception.
Question 2. What would you say to lawmakers about these issues?
You can disagree, but you have to, just respect each other's ideas and feelings, even though if you might not agree with them. Just as much as you want respect for your own opinion, you have to respect someone else's, and it doesn't have to be an argument with any topic. Abortion, XYZ.
There may be very big points socially in our country to talk about, but you have to start first and foremost with what every person deals with. And that's obviously goes back to the economy.
We need to definitely tackle the economic crisis that's facing our country. The Biden administration could have done a lot better in terms of their COVID response and rebounding from it. Being able to better boost oil production in order to bring gas prices back down so that we're not having to drain our country's strategic oil reserves would also be a boon. not only for our national security, but also for our country's economy.
Question 3. What are your thoughts on the direction of our state and country?
I do like the leadership that our state has in general, but as far as our country's concerned, pretty concerned, because it just doesn't seem to be making any progress on the big issues that, again, matter to most Americans.
As a whole, I'm honestly very concerned because of the very divisive and toxic political climate that's developed, especially with election deniers being so prevalent.
To be frank, I am a little skeptical of where this nation is headed as far as the fact that people are trying to take God out of the picture. That's something that as a Christian I'm very, very nervous and scared about and apprehensive about.
For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
With Thanksgiving around the corner, it's time for an Alabama tradition that goes back more than 7 decades. Governor Kay Ivey hosted the 74th annual turkey pardoning at the governor's mansion. The 2 Bates turkeys, Gobbles and Cranberry, were named by a poll on Twitter.
Y'all, it just wouldn't be Thanksgiving in Alabama without this beloved tradition. In the past, we've had 2 turkeys, Clyde and Henrietta, that have made the trip from the farm to the governor's mansion to plead their case. And of course, after thoroughly reviewing the facts, I granted them a pardon. This year, we asked the public to decide which 2 turkeys should have the chance to avoid the Thanksgiving dinner table. And I'm proud to announce that we have Gobbles and Cranberry with us. And we didn't even have to go all the way to Washington, D.C. to get these turkeys. After carefully reviewing all the information provided to me about this pair of turkeys, I believe we made a decision. So today, by the powers vested in me as governor of the state of Alabama, I am hereby granting a full pardon to Gobbles and Cranberry.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Next, I'm joined by Matt Gipson, administrator of the Alabama Beverage Control Board. Matt, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Been a long time, but I'm glad to be here.
That's right. Well, most folks know ABC in terms of the liquor stores scattered throughout the state.
Yes, sir.
That's not all your agency does. Could you kind of walk me through what all the agency does apart from that?
All right. The agency is also responsible for controlling tobacco, the sales of tobacco, mainly to underage, just like alcohol. That's our biggest responsibility. They took our post-certified officers away from us and some to Leah, but we have inspectors that go in to enforce the administrative part of that. And in part of that is going with a Leah officer and an underage minor to buy, to attempt to buy alcohol or tobacco. And we do that as well as issue over 15,000 licenses in the state of Alabama. Now we're also tasked with licensing and inspecting breweries and brew pubs and distilleries, which has been a growing business in Alabama. Mm-hmm. So it's gotten quite busy in the last few years. And all of that is supported by what we call markup on spirits. Spirits pays for everything in the operation of our business.
Well, yeah, I was reading your op-ed, your recent op-ed, that said that ABC brings in $360 million a year in revenue, which is, I didn't know that. Where does that revenue go toward?
That revenue is made up of the tax that's on the alcohol plus part of our markup, and also it funds the operation of the agency in toto, even the tobacco part, because we collect nothing for tobacco license. There's no tobacco license charge, and alcohol is the prime funding, and that $364 million comes from this past fiscal year sales of $704 million. We're almost a $750 million business in the alcohol business in Alabama.
And there are other agencies that benefit from that as well?
Oh, absolutely. We supply money primary and foremost to the general fund, which funds all, as you know, all of the state funds except education. And we even fund some of education, a small amount, on the sales tax collected. Mm-hmm. But we fund the Department of Human Resources would be the next largest recipient, and then after that would be mental health. And we also, because we send our enforcement agencies to ALEA, we send ALEA about $17 million a year as well to help fund them to look after the those felonies that occur in the alcohol business.
Mm-hmm. Now it seems like every year there is a push, or at least a bill filed, to privatize liquor sales, basically to do away with ABC, and are arguing that, hey, the state shouldn't be in the liquor business. Senator Doar tends to have a bill every year. How do you respond to those arguments?
That's a philosophical view, but the only bill that has ever been, there's never been a bill introduced in the House, but there have been bills introduced by Senator Doar in the Senate to take us out of the retail business. The problem with that is that in Alabama we're unique. We're the only one in the nation. We've got 168 retail state stores, but we have over 700 private package stores. Well, the retail stores help support the private package business because we have to ship to our stores, so we ship whatever is needed in those private package stores in area our stores. We ship to them, and that saves them freight. To give you an example, Mississippi has only private package stores. They're a controlled state like we are, but they have to pay around $5 to $6 a case to have it shipped to them. Our customers do not have to do that, our licensees. They pick it up at our designated stores, and we're even improving that to where those that can buy in quantity, we will ship direct. The instance of that is Costco. We ship all of Costco and 2 Costco stores, the 4 of them in the state of Alabama, Mobile, Birmingham, and Huntsville. And so the stores help underwrite our wholesale business. If they did take the retail stores away, then the prices would have to go up to the licensees because we can't operate. We give them a discount, a very low margin, and we couldn't operate on that margin. The retail stores help bring us through.
Mm-hmm. Well, we saw legislation, I guess it was last year, 2021, to allow alcohol delivery.
Yes.
Kind of like the grocery, during the pandemic, we had all these grocery, getting their groceries delivered. But you couldn't have alcohol, so they passed a bill allowing that. Companies like Shipt and Instacart to deliver alcohol, wine, and beer to homes. But it came with some regulatory paperwork.
Yes, sir.
Because this is what y'all regulate. Where are we in that process?
That process is working, mostly in metro areas is where it's working. The Birmingham area, where you have those that have filed and want to deliver because it requires a license, certain amount of liability insurance. It's not real easy to get into that business, but you can do it. Currently, our stores are not delivering. We held back, and the package stores are, those over 750 I enumerated to you, are delivering, or have deliveries. Not all of them. Those that want to sign a contract do. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be working well. Had no complaints about it.
That's interesting. Well, just some curiosities here. I'm sure our viewers might have the same as I do. Y'all, with all your retail locations, you probably see numbers and metrics coming in from your stores. What are the most popular items that people are getting off the shelves liquor-wise?
Well, the number one seller in Alabama is Tito's vodka. They're by far the number one. And right up there with them is that famous cinnamon drink there.
Fireball?
Fireball, yeah. Fireball is right there amongst them. And the top brown, what we call brown goods, which would be any type whiskeys, is your Crown Royal, because it comes now in various flavors, but you add them all together, it's number one in the brown alcohol business, as we call it, or the brown spirits.
Interesting.
And now I tell you what's climbing is your drink you make margaritas with. That's amazing how the growth is since
the mixes and things.
Yeah, since not mixes. We don't sell mixes unless it contains 1% alcohol. We can't sell a grocery store type mix.
But tequila and things like that. Yeah.
Tequila is what I'm talking
Triple
about.
sec.
That is coming up, and probably the one article I just read nationally, it's surpassing vodka in sales at restaurants and bars. Believe it or not. That's hard to believe, but that's what the latest figures give.
Well, I would be really curious. Maybe we can do this one day, is to go see which different areas of the state, especially like college towns compared to metro and stuff like that. I bet it would be some interesting data. But we were talking off air about these high noons that you sell in the stores. But you can only get them at ABC, right? It's because they are actually made with...
We're charged by the code to control sales of alcohol products containing spirits. Beer are handled through beer distributors, wine through wine distributors, but spirits have to come through us.
Do you see any push legislatively to change that to where folks can get something like high noon at a grocery store or something like that?
Yes, I think there will be a big push, because not only grocery stores want it, convenience stores want it, and you got to be careful, because there you're getting into underage, but they already have beer and they already have wine, so why can't they have a 5%? We have agreed with the constituents of Alabama that in that business to go up to 10% alcohol by volume, because you get much above that, then you get into other areas that we sell, which are cordials and low proof type alcohol. So 10% is our cap. We don't know what they'll present. I think you'll be reading about a big battle in the legislature, and they have other issues that they've got to fight that are not a concern to us. Our concern is that we want to be able to continue to sell it, and we want to hold the ABV down to a manageable percentage, which we think 10% ABV is 20 proof. In other words, you take your alcohol by volume on your can or your bottle, and you double that to know what the proof is.
Well, speaking of legislative battles, I mean, who can forget the old Free the Hops campaign? What was that 08, 09, something like that?
I remember that.
Was back when you were in the legislature,
I
right?
I was.
That's right.
And
it's quite a battle.
Sometimes I say, unfortunately, I voted for it, because now that has really added to our workload.
What goes around comes around. We're out of time, but Mac, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by Farrell Turner, president of the Alabama Rural Health Association. Mr. Turner, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Glad to be here.
Now, I know this week marks Rural Health Day. I guess today is Rural Health Day.
It is.
National.
Go rural.
And you've been doing a series of road shows throughout the state at some of these rural hospitals. Where all have you been?
So we started out in Montgomery, and we were hosted there at Alabama State University. From there, we went to Hartselle, and the Chamber of Commerce hosted us. Then we went to Livingston at University of West Alabama, and then to Atmore, and we were hosted by the Porch Creek Health Center there. So we had lots of good input. We had breakout groups after that, and asked those groups to identify what they felt were the most pressing issues, health policies and things like that in their minds.
Mm-hmm. Now, there just has to be a big difference between accessing health care in a rural area as opposed to a urban or suburban area.
Absolutely.
Could you explain some of those differences just from a personal standpoint?
Probably two biggest things. One is transportation. If you live in a town, odds are you've got a doctor or some health facility right around the corner. If you're in a rural area, not so much. Odds are you may have to drive 15, 30 minutes, maybe even longer, just to find a doctor, much less a hospital. And so that's a huge difference. Then you have to think about once you get, say, a medication prescribed, you've then got to go find a pharmacy. In cities, you've got pharmacies that are readily available. Some counties, you may have, one, but it's going to be, again, a good drive to get there. So, there also is a shortage of physicians in most rural counties. When you look at the health professional shortage areas in the state, we have a huge need. I think one of the most recent reports talked about that we needed 125 more doctors in our state. And so, those three things together really are a problem.
Let's talk about the emergence of telehealth and telemedicine, words you really didn't hear 10, 15 years ago.
Sure.
Because it connects to the issue of broadband, right? Here in the State House,
that's right.
They're really talking about focusing on broadband expansion into rural areas. But I've heard criticisms of it, that some people say, well, that just means that, somebody wants to get on Amazon, go shopping or whatever. But these really do have implications for people's health.
Absolutely do. And so broadband, I've been to meetings all over the state for several years where all the announcements of funding, but actually turning that funding into actual broadband is a problem. I fortunately within the last year we really got a decent internet connection, but before that it was awful. As a professional trying to do Zoom meetings, try to do education, much less the same way if you did try to do telehealth, something along those lines is just really a problem. And I'm fortunate. I live fairly close to highways, but often, you don't run into that.
But can telehealth and telemedicine be a difference maker in those rural communities that, like you said, you have to drive so far?
It can help. You've got to have the right computer set up. Even then, it's more of just a face-to-face type thing. Some offices, I know that there are even some hospitals and things like that that may have some of these more refined type things where they've got the devices that are Bluetooth or internet connected, and so that certainly helps. But a lot of times it's just nothing more than a face-to-face, no diagnostic testing or anything like that. So it helps, but it's not perfect.
On a basic level, yeah.
Sure.
So the latest numbers that I have show 8 rural hospital closures in just the last 10 years. That maybe, I don't know if you have better numbers, but how do we make sure that doesn't turn into another 8 hospitals in the next 10 years?
Certainly funding is a big part of it. During COVID, there was a fair amount of money that was put out there for hospitals, but part of the problem there is that funding did not necessarily include a lot of the types of services that our rural hospitals provide. So I guess one way of looking at that is that COVID funding, while it helped, was not the panacea. And so now that's run out. And so now we're falling more back into the typical problems that we've always had, which is a lot of high uncompensated care, indigent care, and a lot of that has to do with really failure of having good affordable health insurance or health services that people can afford.
Well, that brings up the topic of Medicaid expansion, right? It's
Absolutely.
We've been talking about this for years and years. There's kind of a renewed effort to do it. But here's the thing. You've got Democrats that are for it, but Republicans control state government
Sure.
completely. Some of them seem open to it, but are skeptical on the funding stream. And so how do you persuade them, the Republicans, that this won't bankrupt the state 10 years from now?
Well, a couple of things. And it wasn't so many years ago that the comment had been, well, if we could just get through the first year, then we could afford it, because there's been a lot of studies with UAB and Alabama and others that would look at that. And it's like you get a lot of these benefits. Once that initial Medicaid funding goes through, then you've got doctors and hospitals and people like that. They then have more monies coming in, and that sort of primes the pump, so to speak. But you don't hear that talked about anymore. And so since then, we've also had the situation where the matching ratio with the state of Alabama is now a 90% federal match. So that first year necessary to prime the pump that's gotten much smaller on what the state would have to do. And so, I think a lot of those things actually bode better now for the thing making sense. The other thing that, to me, that I think people may miss is that a lot of these are working poor. And what I mean by that is you may have both parents in a family, trying to raise kids. In a lot of cases, they may both have jobs, trying to juggle all these different things in their family and still not be able to afford health insurance. I mean, the cost of health insurance in our country right now for a family can run upwards of $20,000 or more a year, and they just can't afford it. If they're making minimum wage or even, maybe even at $15 an hour type jobs, it's still very difficult to try to afford health care then. So the way I look at it is that through whether it's Medicaid or if there's some other affordable ways for these types of folks to access health care, those are the people that are going to benefit. And so the employers are going to benefit because if you've got people that have got health insurance, they're going to be more likely to take their medications. If they've got chronic conditions, they're going to be addressed. All that health care is going to mean they're healthier. It may mean that their kids are healthier. And so the people are more likely to be at work. Now if their kid is out sick, they may have to take time out to go to the doctor's office or go to the hospital or something like that. So they're missing work, which takes dollars out of the family because they're probably working an hourly type paid job, and so they're missing work. They're not getting that income. They have transportation issues because in a lot of cases they're already rural and having to drive further. And so, this just seems like something that that makes a lot of sense, that would actually help to bring those folks up that are working and trying to make it. But it's almost like the system is just, against them.
And what about for rural hospitals? You mentioned uncompensated care. That's obviously a huge issue for all hospitals, but I would imagine on the margins for rural, especially bad. Do you think Medicaid expansion helps in that regard?
I sure do. That would bring dollars in that would be helpful to those hospitals. A lot of the care now that may be coming to their ER, because again, you go back to these same folks that are doing working 8 hours a day. They come home, they got a sick kid, doctor's offices are already closed. What are they going to do? They're going to go to the ER. That's like the most expensive type of care that you can access. They go there, the cost of that, if they try to pay for it out of their pocket, they're not going to be able to afford it. It'll be a drain on the hospital. They may, forego some of their own food or housing or those sorts of things on their side of it. And so it's, it would help in so many ways. It would help the hospital. It'd bring that funding in. There probably are even more services that would be done at that hospital level and more revenue streams that would be taken care of because of that.
Well, a big issue to follow going forward, especially getting into next year and the next term, the next legislative session.
Sure.
Mr. Turner, thanks again for coming on the show.
Glad to help.
We'll be right back.
When the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik in October 1957, the United States needed to quickly join the space race. Werner von Braun, head of the U.S. space program at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, suggested using a modified Redstone rocket to President Eisenhower. The resulting rocket, Juno, launched Explorer 1, America's first satellite into orbit, on January 31, 1958. The satellite remained in space until 1970.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
The American Enterprise Institute recently came to Birmingham to bring together 150 leaders from across the state to discuss how to build institutions that support children in 4 key areas: family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. The Free Forum, as it was dubbed, saw leaders from the business, education, nonprofit, and political communities come together to address challenges that Birmingham faces. I was honored to attend part of the forum and took the opportunity to invite the two men who spearheaded the effort to come on Capital Journal. And now I'm pleased to be joined by American Enterprise Institute President Robert Doar and AEI Senior Fellow Ian Rowe. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Robert, I'll start with you. Can you share with our viewers just more about AEI and its mission?
Sure. AEI is a public policy research institution based in Washington, but is not entirely focused on Washington. We're focused on the country, on the United States, and on people and places all across America. And our mission is to bring forth ideas and concepts and research papers and commentary on tough issues that are challenging Americans, but with an idea toward finding solutions and things that we can work on together to make our country stronger and better going forward. And we came to Birmingham because we love Birmingham. Birmingham is a rising city. It's got a good group of leaders that care deeply about their community and are kind of tired of, only talking about partisan politics and want to talk about ideas and solutions and answers. And we think the ideas that we have, or especially our scholar Ian Rowe has, are particularly applicable to people who live in Birmingham. Work, family, a focus on community, a focus on business development. These are things communities need, and we found a receptive audience in Birmingham, and that's why we were so happy to be there.
Well, Ian, I know that you've recently published a book called Agency. My copy is in the mail, so I haven't read it yet. But could you share with us what the book is about and maybe how it applies to these free forums that you're hosting around the country?
Well, thank you, Todd. As Robert said, ultimately, AEI is about solutions, and solutions to some of the most entrenched problems in our country that sometimes, when we have a tendency to focus our attention in Washington, in state legislatures, but we've got to go to the people. And when we talk about upward mobility, the factors that really drive how young people in particular can be successful, I've written a book that emphasizes this idea of building agency, the ability to lead the life of your own choosing. And more often than not, there are some key pillars that are empowering institutions that I've really focused on: family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. And so we sought out locations across the country that we thought could be a great first entity to hold a free forum, where we brought in leaders who had experience building strong families, engaging the faith community, creating more educational freedom, and stimulating entrepreneurship. And we were thrilled when we discovered Birmingham already had an infrastructure. We had Jonathan Bass from Samford University present to provide some of the context of the history of Birmingham. Because again, so often ideas that may come from Washington don't take into account the local context for how family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship have really flourished over time. So we were really thrilled to have the first free forum with leaders, and we've already had some incredible responses back in terms of collaborations that have been stimulated to create more of this sense of agency, self-determination throughout Birmingham.
And we had Mayor Woodfin, we had the Herberts, we had Johnny Johns. I mean, this is the leadership community of Birmingham, open and receptive and talking and sharing their ideas with us, and we're sharing our ideas with them. It's just a way to help build communities.
That's a great point, Robert, because when I looked across that room, I saw a lot of diversity. I saw some of the richest, most wealthy people in the state sitting right next to school teachers. And so one of the questions I've been asking here in Alabama is, how do we get those from affluent communities with great schools to care about and invest in improving poorer communities with low-performing schools? It seems like that's what y'all are after.
That's exactly what we're hoping to accomplish. The convening power that AEI partnered with local leaders to come together. We can fill a room just like you saw, where you had, as you said, some of the wealthiest folks in the Birmingham community to others who lead institutions that are trying to improve the lives of the most vulnerable. We had leaders from Hope Institute who's bringing character development work to schools all across the state of Alabama. That's the role we're seeking to play, a catalytic role where the free forum can bring together leaders, again, organized around strengthening families, engaging the faith community, creating more educational freedom, and then stimulating entrepreneurship. That's a powerful package, and we were just thrilled that Birmingham could be the first place. And we're already, I haven't told you this yet, Robert, but we've already had some requests to come back in March and April to follow up on some of the collaborations that have already started.
Wow, that's exciting. Robert, when I met you in Birmingham, you mentioned that your father worked for the Department of Justice as an attorney in the Civil Rights Division during the Civil Rights Movement. So that had to expose you to a lot of what happened down here, the effects of which are still felt today.
Well, it did. My father was the Assistant Attorney General in charge of civil rights for the federal government in the mid 1960s. He had started in that department, or in that division of the Justice Department, in 1960, and he was there till 1967. And a lot happened in Alabama, and a lot happened in Birmingham during that period. And he came to respect and honor the people of Birmingham, both black and white, that were trying to make change. And it wasn't always easy. Not everyone always agreed. But the fact is, it wasn't his work that changed Birmingham. It wasn't the federal government's work that all by itself changed Birmingham. It was the people of Birmingham, the federal judges, Judge Johnson, the judges on the Fifth Circuit, the citizens who, black and white, who said, look, the old way is not the way we want to be. And what I came to feel is that if you apply yourself to a difficult challenge, a hard problem, you can make progress on it. And I think Birmingham and Alabama generally is an example of that. I think America is an example of that. And so, it's great for me to come back to a place that had some real challenges and real difficulties, but someone in my family made some small effort to help, and it got better. And I think that sometimes in America, we spend too much time focusing on what's wrong with our country and not enough on focusing on what's right. And the changes that were brought about by the Civil Rights Movement in the South and throughout the United States helped to make America stronger and better. And, I love being there because I can see it in every interaction I have with people in Birmingham, including with Mayor Woodfin and other leaders in the black community.
Ian, there's a lot of talk about school choice here in Alabama, basically efforts to expand it, expand school choice options. I know that you started a network of charter schools in New York, maybe a couple of networks. So in your experience in that movement, what lessons have you learned that maybe could apply here in Alabama?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I mean, one of the things that's so important to me is not only my work at AEI, where we're doing research and thinking through a lot of the challenges and thinking through ideas, is how do we actually build institutions that in real life you execute, which is really why I run schools. Because right now I'm actually at Vertex Partnership Academies, a network that I've just created. And we're in a school district where only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college. And yet there's a cap on charter schools here in New York City. So we're finding ways to work with the state legislature to create more educational freedom throughout New York. There are a lot of lessons in that process that I'm hoping to bring to Alabama, because there are many pockets within Birmingham and other parts of the state in which kids face a similar situation, where the vast majority of schools that are available have not been a solid solution for parents for generations. And the last thing we want is a scenario in which, in Birmingham or anywhere in the country, where middle and upper class folks have the opportunity to exercise school choice because they can send their kids to a private school, they can move to a nice neighborhood, and yet the most vulnerable people, particularly in pockets of Birmingham, don't have access to educational freedom. So there are certain things that we're doing to try and share it with the policymakers, and even philanthropists in Birmingham to encourage this idea of school choice, to show how we have a lot of data in New York that says the more school choice, actually academic improvement occurs throughout the district, not only for the kids who are exercising school choice, it also improves in traditional district schools. So I think there's a lot that the free forum, the free initiative can bring to places like Birmingham so that this idea of school choice becomes much more universal.
You talked about taking on the education establishment, taking on the teachers union, which and being successful, including in the courts. But that could not have been easy in a place like New York, just considering the politics of New York.
Fighting the teachers union is not for the faint of heart. that is for sure. But you know what? We in our case, the teachers union did try to sue our schools before opening. We emerged victorious, but the lessons we learned we are now bringing to Birmingham, because there's a particular element where you do have charter schools that are often not growing at the high school level, and in many localities, the need for high schools is intense. But there's a precedent that we've been now able to set that we think we're going to be able to benefit the schools in Birmingham for how potentially we could create more great high schools. So all of these lessons, the thing is, AEI sits in an incredible position where we can see what's going on across the country in places like Arizona, where the governor just created educational savings accounts, where he's given incredible power in the hands of individual parents to take vouchers to be able to be used at private schools, religious schools, home schools, those kinds of lessons for how educational freedom is now being exercised across the country. Here in the Bronx, Arizona, other locations, that's what we want to bring to Birmingham to now empower local leaders to figure out the solution that best fits Birmingham and the rest of the state.
The key thing is the law is really on our side with regard to choice, and the parents are on our side. And those two interests are strong enough to overcome the teachers union anywhere.
Well, Robert, you mentioned it's not just Birmingham. You're going to several cities throughout the United States. I think y'all mentioned Cleveland and a couple others coming up. That's interesting for a Washington think tank to get outside the Beltway and go to American cities. It's probably unique. What brought this about? What compelled you to say, let's get outside of Washington and go to the American cities?
Because we want to have impact. You can talk to people in Washington all you want, and it turns out you can have impact of some kind, but it's really only on the federal government. It's limited. And people in the federal government listen to people from their communities. They respond to what's going on in their hometowns and their voters in their home communities. And so it just is a pure matter of how can we get our ideas to have greater impact on the lives of Americans. And strategically, we've decided that the way to do that is to get out of Washington and go talk to people and in some respects, create converts, create people that see things or see our evidence and see our facts and maybe don't do it exactly the way we do, but they're open to it. And then they become stronger advocates for the kind of change their communities need. It's purely about helping change America. If you want to change America, you can't only focus on Washington.
Well, zooming out a bit, if you'll indulge me, we don't have national folks on Alabama Public Television every day. So I wanted to just ask briefly about the national environment. We've got this really interesting political environment right now after this election. We're going to have divided government in Washington. Some people think that's a good thing, right? Maybe a little gridlock every once in a while. But from y'all's perspective, given the polarization that's out there, can this divided government find anything to work together on, or are the two sides just too entrenched?
Well, every year in every session, there's a lot of fuss about the divisions, but less attention. 2 or 3 important things get done. Mm-hmm. And infrastructure gets done, for instance. Some aspects of the COVID relief was done in a bipartisan fashion. They're working on a bill on electoral college reform and a bill on gay marriage. And those things do happen, even when we're as divided as we are. So I'm not, I mean, it may not be 5 things, and it may only be 2, but they'll be important. And the political parties will come together, and Democrats will be picked off to vote for Republican priority, and Republicans will be picked off to vote for maybe a Democratic priority, and some progress will be made. But on the other hand, when it comes to spending, I do, and I'm actually happy about this, I think the federal government has spent too much and has contributed to the inflation problem that we now have and our long-term debt and deficit problems. And in that case, a little bit of gridlock is a good thing, because if they can't decide what to spend on or how to spend it or how much to spend, it's likely they won't spend. Now, they won't pass major savings. That's true. But at least we'll be able to slow it down a little bit, and there'll be a little bit of fiscal restraint. I'm hopeful of that. So, there's divisions. But there was also, by the way, I don't know how you saw it. You're a longtime observer of these issues. There was a vote out there in the country that people need to pay attention to, and it was for kind of substance and character and normalcy over craziness. The guys men and women on the fringes of both parties lost, and it were the moderates that won, because the independents and the moderates chose character, principle, normalcy over crazy partisanship. And I've picked that up already in the last week as Republicans and Democrats have returned to Washington. That's what they're saying. They're saying the fringes in their party lost on both sides.
I totally agree. That was my takeaway as well, and hopefully they'll actually take the lesson this time.
That's right.
And I would just add, emerging from 2-3 years of COVID and school closures and masking, more and more parents had much greater visibility into what was going on in their schools. And so this push for educational freedom, and Robert's point earlier, that parents are the key, my hope is that both major parties recognize that school choice, educational freedom is something that would benefit either party if that's something that they made a priority.
Yep.
Yeah, our own, Katie Britt, who just was elected to the Senate, is calling it the year of the parent. So, maybe that takes hold. Well, look, before I let you go, I noticed that the annual AEI dinner was, I guess, earlier this week. Looked like a great time honoring a great man in Arthur Brooks. Can y'all talk about that? How was the dinner?
Well, it was great. We had 1,600 people, more people than ever before. We raised more money for a dinner of that sort than we'd ever raised before. Arthur gave a great speech. It's on our website. You can watch it. You can watch my introduction. And the political figures who came were of the variety we've just discussed. And you're right. We welcome with great open arms Katie Britt to her position in the United States Senate. She's clearly one of those candidates of substance and seriousness and great character. So it was a great night. One of the things that somebody came up to me, and I'll tell you this is interesting, who goes to these events of both sides. He said one thing that's clear about an AEI event, at least, is that we are very open and direct about our patriotism and about our love of country. And people like that. It gave them a good spirit, a good way to start the year, at least the political year. So it was fun.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, congratulations on your success at AEI. Thank you for coming to Birmingham, and we will look forward to covering your continued involvement in our state going forward.
Thanks.
Thank you. We're thrilled. Birmingham is an honor.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and we'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
The George C. Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville has been the heart of the U.S. space program since its beginnings in the late 1950s. Marshall Space Flight Center was designated as the agency's propulsion center, developing the rockets that would launch NASA's missions into space. Marshall helped make history in 1961 when its Mercury Redstone rocket powered Alan B. Shepard into suborbital flight, making him the first American in space. Marshall's major task during the 1960s was the development of the Saturn rockets that were used in the Apollo moon missions. They aimed to fulfill President John F. Kennedy's challenge to NASA to execute a moon landing by the end of the decade. Saturn V rockets powered each of the 13 Apollo missions launched between 1967 and 1973, including the first moon landing on July 20, 1969. Marshall also developed the propulsion for the Space Shuttle program and is currently integral to the science and life systems on the International Space Station and the lead center for the Space Launch System development.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We won't have an episode on Thanksgiving week, but our next Capital Journal episode is scheduled for Sunday, December 4th at noon, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.